Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm your host, Sean Lavery. Susie, my co-host, is working this week. We have a little bit of an earlier show that we're doing today, so she was unable to get off work early enough to be here, but we're definitely going to have her back on next week, so tune in for that. But I'm super excited about today's show because, normally we cover the techniques and you guys are used to hearing me cover those kind of things, but we're going to go a little bit off the rails today and do a different kind of show. You guys have heard any of the regular listeners of the show have heard me interview Jeff Little quite a few times. We've had him on for all sorts of different things. Definitely a fountain of knowledge for all things fishing and kayak angling, and just an all around great guy. But one of the things that Jeff introduced me to last season was a cool little tournament called the Blotchy Bass Bonanza. And I was able to kind of compete in that towards the end of the year last year. It gave me some incentive to get out on the water once all the Noobs tournaments and the other tournaments that we do were done. And just kind of pushed me to kind of fish a little bit more than I might have otherwise. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And it actually it's going on again this year, so I was able to start right away this year when it started up. So I've been taking part of that since it started back up this year. But I reached out to the folks who kind of got that all up and running and asked them if they wanted to come on the show, and they were gracious enough to accept that invitation. So I'd like to introduce to you guys Sean, Cynthia, and Luke from Blotchy Bass Bonanza, and they're going to tell us a little bit about all that fun stuff, how it came to be. And, I'm interested to hear everything about the origins and who it's benefiting and, all the other things that come along with that. So welcome to the Noob Show, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Sean.
No problem.
Thanks, Sean.
So if you guys want to just take turns introducing yourselves, who you are, where you're from, and then how you got involved with Blotchy Bass Bonanza and all things behind that.
Well, since I'm the only lady in the group, I'll go first. My name's Cynthia Holt. I'm a fish biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife out of DFW, and I actually got involved in the project because one of the primary investigators, which is one of Luke's students, was a colleague of mine from Mississippi State University, and he was telling me, about this data collection process he was trying and need a little help, and I was happy to join in because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have my PhD. So shout out to Clay.
Very nice. Maybe I'll step in. So my name's Luke Iwanowics. I'm a research biologist with the US Geological Survey at the Eastern Ecological Science Center. Essentially this blotchy bass syndrome is a condition that kind of landed on our radar, almost a decade ago. And, essentially we've been doing a lot of research, looking into the biology behind what causes it, and essentially wanted to launch a nationwide effort to actually get a better handle on where and when anglers were actually seeing this, which kind of segues into Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And so my name's Sean Simmons. I run an online platform called the Anglers Atlas and a mobile app called MyCatch. And a really central focus of what we do is citizen science, where we engage anglers to help address key research and or management challenges faced by fishery scientists. And it's really yielded really new and unique ways about practicing science where the anglers get to lead the charge. So I'll dive into that in a little bit more. But just for those folks who are curious, I'm based in a place called Prince George, northern British Columbia. Just for those who see the map behind me, Seattle's there, Vancouver's there. I'm way up there in the central interior, 360 degrees of wilderness.
Wow. Okay. Well, what time is it there? I always feel bad when I have people that are so far away.
It's still morning.
I gotcha. Well, I appreciate you again taking the time to come on. So, so that's interesting. I've obviously caught the smallmouth bass with the blotchy spots on them, and I know there's a lot of kind of theories around going on around about that. I've heard different things like, it doesn't really affect the fish. It's just a pigmentation thing. I was curious, how much truth there is to that, and what leads you to study that? Is it really an issue, or is it like, is it cosmetic?
Sure. So maybe I'll jump in for this. So essentially, the hyperpigmentation that you're talking about, or these the blotches, have been observed by anglers for a number of years now. So actually, some of the first evidence of this condition was observed or reported back in the mid 1980s in the Hudson River in largemouth bass. It really hit our radar around 2012, about a decade ago, in the Susquehanna River drainage. Around that, just prior to that time, there were lots of mortality events in smallmouth bass, and kind of shortly after, anglers started observing smallmouth bass with this blotchy pigmentation, which is something they hadn't previously noted. So we with USGS basically started working with state biologists, with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, to kind of get a handle on the cause. At the time, there really wasn't any good science supporting potential causes. There was speculation that maybe this condition was the result of a recessive trait, exposure to UV. At that time, there was a lot of endocrine disruption research being done in the Susquehanna River, and there was a thought that maybe contaminants were part of it. We started using some contemporary DNA methods and actually identified a new type of virus associated with these pigmented lesions. So we've really been following up on this viral etiology as a cause in the case of the smallmouth bass and the largemouth bass as well.
Okay. I was curious about the widespreadness of it as well. Like I live 15 minutes from the Susquehanna, so I'm
Sure.
praised to have one of the best fisheries
Right.
in my backyard. But as such, I think, I had heard that this was one of the main places where it's that phenomenon has been observed. And I was curious, how widespread is it? If you're saying, Cynthia, you're from Texas, you see it down there, and how does that spread? Is it because I know the time frame that you're talking about, the Susquehanna, just from my research and talking to the riverkeeper for our area, the Susquehanna really was kind of in a bad way at that point. There was a lot of pollution. It's still an ongoing fight today, but it's definitely come back as a fishery, and we're doing, not great, but still better than we were, obviously, in the time frame that you're referring to there. So,
right. Yep. So you kind of asked questions about the where and when, right? So it's interesting because as we talk to state partners, particularly in the case of largemouth bass, this condition has it's been observed forever. There are reports, and Cynthia can probably give you some background information on observations in the South and Texas and whatnot. But anglers kind of historically have always sort of seen this, and really, I guess, never took note of it in largemouth bass anyway. It's interesting because in the case of smallmouth bass, it almost seems to be currently emerging. We have relationships with fish biologists in Vermont that just started seeing this, a couple of years ago. It's just sort of the case about a decade ago in Susquehanna, and we have reports of blotchy smallmouth bass as of 2008 up in Lake St. Clair. So, a big question is, what changed? What, was this a new introduction? Like, seeing how we have evidence of this viral etiology, there's sort of some question about, was virus recently introduced to those areas? So we're actually in the process of doing some, science behind the scenes to kind of ask that question. But really, we're kind of just at the beginning of the story when it comes to answering questions. And, which is one of the reasons why this blotchy bass Bonanza was launched, because we really want to get a solid handle on where anglers are actually seeing this, right? Because then we can actually start asking some better questions once we know the where. And then, there is evidence that there's some seasonality to this condition. So again, knowing that information, we can kind of come in and ask some better science questions.
Gotcha. And Cynthia, has that been your experience? As far as how prevalent it is in the South and Texas area?
Yeah, we actually, I was just double checking my dates here. We actually had some reports of blotchy bass syndrome on largemouth bass going as far back as 2003.
Okay.
Our fish disease specialist received some photos via email from some anglers, and he received a few over the next decade or so, and then it kind of quieted down. We have seen it on a few smallmouth bass, a few spotted bass, and then even a few Guadalupe bass, which I'm not sure if you're aware, being from your area of the country, but Guadalupe bass is only found in Texas. So
Yep.
This is when this initially started, it was just sort of a data collection effort for Texas Parks and Wildlife. But then once we had an angler actually submit a photo of a Guadalupe bass that appeared to have blotchy bass syndrome. Of course, we weren't able to get a definitive, we weren't able to get a swab of it, but it looks blotchy. So then, Texas Parks and Wildlife kind of started thinking, well, we really need to get on this train here, because if it is gonna in any way negatively impact a fishery, we definitely want to make sure we're protecting the Guadalupe. So, but yeah, we're mostly seeing definitely the seasonal aspect. Of course, in Texas, it gets warmer sooner than it does in the northern latitudes. So
Very jealous
our our anglers have actually been reporting blotchy fish since December.
Gotcha.
We started getting really heavy reports about February or March, and right about now they're starting to die off. I was a month ago getting 2 or 3 submissions a day. Now I'm getting 2 or 3 submissions a week.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay. So there definitely seems to be on that end a seasonal aspect to it. And I was curious, just, when we're talking about seeing the numbers increase, 2003 to 2012, how much just information sharing probably contributed to that? Because maybe in 2003, there wasn't necessarily a great way for someone in Texas to say to someone in Pennsylvania, hey, we're seeing this, are you seeing this? And with,
right.
just how information sharing has become such a huge part of our culture, and technology has advanced, the ways we can share information probably has led to more knowledge and awareness of it, I would think, as a whole.
Absolutely, and I can even speak to, because no offense to Luke or Sean, but I think I'm the most recently removed from an academic setting, and even up until last year when I became a part of this project, we had always been taught, fisheries biologists were taught, those hyperpigmented areas on a fish was melanosis or hyperpigmentation. It was related to stress or spawning or chemicals or any number of diet. I can't tell you how many anglers I have had say that they think it's because bass are eating crawfish and it's the iodine in the crawfish. So, like, we are really just now learning that, thanks to Luke and Clay's research, that it's associated with a virus. And that's been something that, as a fisheries biologist, I've had to say, well, shoot, I didn't know that. And now, what I thought I knew for 15 years is not right. So
Right.
it's been really cool to see how it progresses and transforms what we know.
And it's got to be good to if now that you might have some evidence that is associated with a virus, that's got to be sending off some alarm bells to you, because anything that's virus related can spread way quicker than you probably want it to. And if it is going to negatively impact a fishery, the more information you can have about it, and the earlier you can attack that, probably the better, I would think.
And that was actually one of the one of the reasons for this, blotchy bass bonanza, the biosurveillance too, is that, I mean, for one, it's kind of excuse me, it's kind of exciting to be on the front end of this this issue, but originally when we wanted to identify where anglers were seeing this disease and where they were not seeing it, right? So if it's not in certain locations, potentially we can get ahead of it and keep it out, right? Keep it from moving, probably using, similar, tactics like we do for aquatic nuisance species and whatnot. But there is that aspect, and you asked this earlier, and I didn't really answer or address the question, but at present, we don't know if this virus is actually causing a problem in the fish. So we don't want to lead to some type of public scare, because the deal is we really don't know.
Right.
There's probably the potential for it's probably a risk factor for open skin lesions, but at the same time, there is that aspect. Folks seem to be fairly sensitive to viruses these days. So
yes,
we have to be
especially given the last couple of years.
Yeah. Exactly. So we do have to be cautious, but also responsible. With the way we address these address these aquatic diseases.
Right. And that's a very good point, that it shouldn't be something that right away that maybe alarm bells was a bad terminology, but because obviously this has been around for a little bit, and in populations of fish that, like, I'd say, if anything, probably the Susquehanna River is recovering, is actually better than it was probably when it was first observed. So it isn't something that's necessarily a negative or something that we absolutely have to drop everything and everybody run around with their hair on fire worrying about. But like you said, the more you know, and the more you can say this isn't what's happening, or this is what's happening, but we have a handle on it and this is how we're going to address it, the better.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's that aspect. Cynthia had kind of alluded to the fact that previously it was thought that this condition was the result of something else. So at the very least, and that's kind of where these forums are really useful, is that we can actually help disseminate the best science we can, right? So we can actually so folks actually genuinely understand why these fish look the way they do, instead of getting
jumping to conclusions or
down best guesses. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that's I think a great way to do it, and I'm curious where the idea to start using anglers as the data gatherers for this is. I think that's a brilliant idea, because I mean, you guys obviously have limited time. Fish biologists have limited time to and can't cover the the amount of area that you would probably need to cover to get a good handle and a good data set on all of this. Whereas if you target people who are already out there anyway, give them an incentive to do it, which obviously we'll talk about that in a little bit too. And I'm guessing that's how Sean kind of got involved in this. I was just curious what led to that and how that idea came about.
Yeah, well, I guess so. I mean, essentially, we wanted to launch some type of biosurveillance effort. We spread the word with a lot of state biologists and state agencies to try to collect data through them, and realized it probably wasn't the most efficient mechanism. Both Clay and I were aware of some of these smartphone apps. Originally, I thought it would be really that would be great if we could develop one, but that's certainly not in our wheelhouse or within our resources within so we started looking around. I actually noticed that one of my graduate advisors at UMass, Francis Juanez, who now lives in British Columbia, I believe, had actually used Anglers Atlas MyCatch. So I reached out to him, and he actually put me in touch with Sean, and we kind of started that relationship from there.
All right, Sean. And so when it landed in your lap, what they basically said, hey, we want to do this for as a way to collect data. And why don't you explain a little bit about where Anglers Atlas came from and how then that fit into what you do with Anglers Atlas and MyCatch?
Sure. Maybe I'll rewind the clock a little bit to sort of take you back how I got on this path in the first place. So I'm a limnologist by training. So a little bit sideways from fishing is that I studied lakes. I studied the chemistry, the physics, the ecology, the biology of lakes. A local lake here in Prince George, I went through a big fish kill in '93. And when I was doing my research, I realized all this great data had been collected historically, detailed maps, stocking data. And if you like fishing, that stuff is gold. So after I graduated, I started publishing free fishing maps, and we'd start interviewing local anglers, whether it be a lodge on a lake or a river or a tackle shop in a local area, and telling their stories and around maps for each one of these places. So we built out, and this was starting in 1999. We now have over 250,000 water bodies, including ocean, where we've got maps available for anglers. And we realized that anglers also start sharing information back. Certainly the hero shots. I mean, everyone loves to share their hero shot for sure, but they also share other pieces of data, like access points or there's a warning here or that sort of stuff. A few will share hotspots, but we try, and MyCatch is exclusively secret spots stay secret. That's the promise we make to anglers, and that's got to be the deal for this thing to work, is that the high resolution location data has to be protected and only shared when you can trust the source, like some universities will share it with, where they sign a data sharing agreement. So that's really important, is making sure that the data is protected, but we want it publicized so we can generalize it off into a water body like the Susquehanna River. Sure, I caught a fish there, but we're not going to share where that fish was caught on that river. And that seems to be a good balance point. Anyway, so working with anglers, and mostly across Canada, but we've now certainly, as you can tell, moved into the US as well. We were thinking, and about 6 years ago, talking with a bunch of scientists and the challenges they have in getting data on their fishery. I mean, traditional creel surveys, netting surveys, all those survey methods are very expensive. So you can do a few pinpricks on the landscape, but it's really hard to get a good sense of what's happening across huge numbers of water bodies. But, in Canada, we've got 4 million anglers. In the US, I think there's about 40 million anglers. Many are passionate conservationists. Many that really care about the resource and historically have always liked participating in science. If you go back pre-internet, angler logbooks have been a really common form of engaging anglers to help fishery scientists. Now, you were talking about sharing. Well, with the advent of the phone, the internet, but then especially the mobile phone, it's opened up huge opportunities to really do this in a systematic, scalable system. So we launched the MyCatch app in 2018, specifically for anglers to report their catch data. So we could, at an early stage, just do like catch per unit effort, do what's your catch rate, and see, are we getting data that's similar to creel? Because we didn't even know if we'd get good data. I mean, it could be highly skewed. I mean, you talk to a lot of fishery scientists, they won't trust anglers at all. They're not going to tell us the right information. But we thought, you know what? There are enough anglers that do want to tell the right, do want to share good information, that I think there's something here. And so that we started just scaling this up. And then over time, we've learned that a lot of anglers will share data, and the data is actually really good. And that's the thing that we spend a lot of time is really systematically collecting the data so it can fit an experimental design. So in this case, Blotchy bass is all about, can we collect presence, absence data? So where is it located? We're confident in that. And prevalence. Out of every 100 bass you catch, how many have that blotchy? So we can sort of get a sense of how it ebbs and flows over time. And so basically with those two criteria, then we structured the event, Blotchy Bass Bonanza, set it up. And this is one of the key distinctions about what we've done with MyCatch. And I'll rewind back to 2020 when COVID hit. Two of our staff are hardcore tournament anglers, and they fished tournaments, and they realized all their tournaments were canceled. So we were thinking, well, we've got an app. What if we adapt the app so we can run catch photo release tournaments? So a strong conservation message, being able to, instead of holding the fish in a live well or harvesting the fish, we can get the fish back in the water ideally in under a minute. So they're basically back swimming, whereas we get length measurement, we get high resolution imagery of the fish, And we also get a GPS, which we're very careful about how we use. Only 3 people on my staff, well, actually 4, Jamie as well, can have access to that data, and we lock it down. Even our tournament anglers, they can't touch that data on our staff. So it's really important. And I'll emphasize that over and over and over again, because that's such an important factor. But anyways, the event model has allowed us to rapidly expand up citizen science based on specific experiments. So this is Blotchy bass. It's an event, one of many we've got on the platform, and it's very much tailored to answering this question about blotchy bass. But we run a whole bunch of other events, like Iowa Walleye Challenge, working with the state of Iowa on the DNR to get a sense of what's happening with walleye across the state. And so we've got another event we're just kicking off in Canada in the Bow River to see if we can help identify whirling disease. It's a disease that affects trout. And so we set up an event for that. And that event model allows us to run all these scientific experiments, essentially, where anglers are leading the charge and answer those questions simultaneously. So that's really been the sweet spot, is that event model for us. Anyways, I could talk for hours, so I'll zip it now and I'll pass it back to you.
No, I appreciate that. And, but I think that's one of the coolest things too, because that is a big thing for me, is the conservation aspect of it. That's why I have the river keepers on. After talking to the river keepers, I became involved in a local creek study where I go once a month and monitor the water quality for a creek that is a tributary to the Susquehanna River. And I've been crazy involved with that. We just recently started studying microplastics as well, to see the prevalence of that in the creeks, and then how that goes into the river. So it is definitely something near and dear to my heart as well. And just knowing the fact that I can go out and do something I love, which is fish, and it gives me motivation to get out on the water, but also to know that on top of all that, it's also going to a good cause, is very, very cool. And the fact that there's prizes involved, that definitely sweetens the pot as well. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that too, and how basically let folks know how they can kind of get involved with this if they want to.
Do you want me to go, or Cynthia?
However you guys.
The AFCO deal.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll go. Well, I helped facilitate the AFCO deal, but Sean and Luke and Clay set up the Bass Pro deal for last year. But essentially, we have been extremely lucky to get 2 different major companies that supply outdoor wildlife recreation materials to all recreational enthusiasts. But this year, AFCO was kind enough to donate, was it $15,000, Sean? Wow. Or $10,000. I'm sorry, $10,000 in gift cards to be given away as prizes for anglers who were drawn that had entered the Blotchy Bass Bonanza. So essentially, and I'm kind of getting into Sean's world here, but anglers can download the app, the MyCatch app, for free. They go in there, they sign up for the Blotchy Bass Bonanza event. It is also free. And then they go fishing. Whenever they go fishing, they have to open the app, which it's kind of funny because this has been the one thing that's been the most difficult for Texas anglers to adjust to, because last year, Texas anglers submitted everything via email to me after their fishing trip. But with the MyCatch app, you actually need to record the data and collect and take the photos within the app. So that's been sort of the adjustment that Texas anglers have had to make. But they take the photos in there, they submit their trip, and they're automatically entered for a drawing. And because AFCO was so gracious, we can actually give away 8 $100 gift cards a month. Wow. So, that's pretty fantastic. And, and like you mentioned, a lot of anglers, and like Sean mentioned, the prize is just, that's the cherry on top. They're just happy, to be a part of something that they care so much about.
Right. And I figure if I'm going to be out on the water doing it anyway, and just a small little time investment gets somebody else information that they need to help make that fishery a better place, I'm all for it. There's no reason not to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Sean, I just to throw another plug into your app. I love the fact that I can see my route and see where on my route I caught fish. So that helps me go back. And you talk about fishing logs and stuff like that. I go back and look at that and say, oh, okay, on this day, oh, where did I go? Oh, I caught this fish down here. It was kind of similar weather conditions or whatever water conditions to today. So I'm going to go back to that spot and see if I try my luck and can do as well there. So there's a lot of information that besides what the science nature of it's pulling out of this that's very useful to anglers as well, that they can and go back and look at history and all of that as well.
Yeah, that was really important, is making sure that we can provide value back to the anglers, because there's got to be something in it for the anglers. Like, certainly the prizes are a key part, but from a personal angling perspective, I know for me, I've got all these catches in BC. We've got some on the West Coast, some of the salmon trips we've taken, a sturgeon tripping on the Fraser. And I can go back and I can see exactly where those catches were made, look at the lengths, get a sense of sort of where the clustering is, and just see, okay, am I going to go back to the same location, or am I going to try a new location? And we are sort of, if you think about it, this is always a work in motion. So we don't know if we're providing the best value back to anglers. So we're always interested to hear from anglers, is there something you'd like to see a feature and adaptation, if we can include it without, breaking the budget or killing our developers, we'd love to include that. But the visualization of your own data for your own purposes is really an important part of that. And I don't know if we're hitting the target or we're getting close, but it was something we're always trying to work on.
Cool. And I definitely have used it. And I know you say, information is private, but I have a few friends that I do share, where I catch with. And so it's easy just to take a screenshot and say, hey, this is my route. This is where I went and this is where I caught them, and I'll share that with a few people, definitely not everybody, but,
Yep.
but very cool. So, where do you guys see this going from here? Like, obviously you want to keep data collecting. Do you have hopes to? I was curious about what you see in the angler involvement, how it's grown. Is it super fast growing, or hopefully outlets like this will grow your amount of anglers present. But I was just curious how you're seeing that increase.
Sean, if I may, I'm going to jump in on this one. We've actually, in addition to the great partnership that we have with AFTCO, we were also able to develop a partnership with MLF fishing tournaments through their fisheries management division. So that has actually led us to be able to receive information about blotchy bass caught not only in North America, but in the other countries where MLF tournaments are held. We've actually received some data and photos from tournaments of fish that were caught in a couple of different, what are they called? Are they provinces in Mexico? Is that
I know
states?
what you're talking about. Yeah.
Two or three different areas in Mexico, Italy, and South Africa are some information we've received so far. And although that the app is not set up for those anglers to be able to use that, but in addition to the app, we've been able to make those connection with with these major fishing tournaments, and we're able to reach more anglers than I know I ever thought possible. I mean, maybe Sean was like, this is nothing to him, but yeah, we're seeing. And just from a Texas perspective, I have to give a shout out to the anglers here, because we received in 8 months from when I started advertising using my personal Facebook page to the few angling groups that I'm associated with, because they're always the ones with their thumbprint on the pulse of the fishing around here. So when I started that, 8 months later, we had received 1,016 individual fish submissions from, I can't even count how many anglers, and from all over the state of Texas and some in Louisiana. So, but then now, as we present these data and we're going to conferences, and it's, getting on podcasts and social media and being shared everywhere, it just seems like there's always, more anglers, more state biologists coming from everywhere that says, hey, we want, we saw this over here, how can we help? What can we do? And it feels like it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger every day.
Awesome. I was hoping to hear that. And like I said, hopefully this will contribute to that in any way possible. I'm definitely happy to help. We do have quite a a good group of listeners for our podcast as well. So if we can get quite a few of them, hopefully contributing fish as well, we'll do what we can. So Luke, do you have any other hopes and dreams for this, or where it's headed? Or
so, I mean, I see this blotchy bass biosurveillance, continuing for some time. But in many ways, this almost seems to be like the ideal, fish disease to track. I mean, it's very obvious to anglers. As you mentioned, I think as Cynthia and Sean mentioned, communication, just getting the word out to kind of onboard more anglers, more boots on the ground, is probably one of our biggest bottlenecks. But I kind of see this blotchy bass biosurveillance via smartphone app, sort of just functioning as, in some ways, a means to condition anglers to actually collect this type of data. And I can see in the future this being applied for monitoring other fish diseases or other conditions. I mean, you can even see application for, surveillance of invasive species, even, right? So, I mean, there are lots of applications, and really the connecting with the anglers is probably the best way to increase surveillance. I mean, resource managers only have limited bandwidth, right? If we already have a group of passionate anglers on the water, utilizing their data sets is, I mean, it's amazing if that can actually be utilized, especially for something more proactive than reactive. So I kind of see potential growth in that direction.
I think it seems like it could definitely be used as a model for many, like you mentioned, invasive species. And we just my last episode we talked about snakehead. Snakehead are something that they're really talking a lot about here in the Susquehanna River as they make their way up the river and into our waters. And there's a lot of information going around all over the place about whether it's good, whether it's bad. But I would think just being able to use that to study that, like scientists can take a look at what you guys have done with blotchy bass, and with little to a little bit of manipulation, make it match their studies that they're doing as well. And I'm thinking, I know Pennsylvania, we're kind of lucky because our Fish and Game does invest a lot into conservation efforts, but I'm sure there's some states where maybe they don't have the budget to do that, and they don't have a lot of staff that can go out and study all these different bodies of water that might need studied. And if you can get your data through something like the MyCatch app and similar to how we're doing with Blotchy Bass Bonanza, that it will help those states that don't have the resources or the manpower to do it themselves to still find a way to get that information and maybe conduct their own studies at that point. I could see that being super helpful, and just being a model for future going forward, saying, hey, you don't have to have all the manpower, as much as you can get is great, but in the event that you are struggling in that department, here's another way that you can collect data. So, all right. Well, very cool, guys. What am I missing? Like, is there anything else that you can think of that you'd want listeners to know? Or I know, Sean will definitely, let you talk about, the website, or the app, and then how you get the app and where to go to sign up. But anything else you guys can think of that I might have forgotten?
We kind of covered a lot of the important bits.
Yeah,
I think one thing that we haven't really talked about is, because this was a big thing for anglers in Texas, is the virus transmissible to humans or domestic pets? And as far as we know, the answer is no. This virus, again, I'm not a virologist, but this is what Clay and Luke have told me, is that it is not, it's never been, found in humans or domestic pets. So therefore, the fish are definitely safe to be handled, safe to eat as long as they're cooked properly. You don't have to worry about, your dog getting in the water that, might contain this virus. It would be perfectly fine. So that's, we definitely want anglers to know that, they're not putting themselves at risk if they catch and collect data on blotchy bass for us.
That's definitely a good point. Have you seen it? I know obviously you talked about it being in a couple different of the black bass family, like Guadalupe. Is Guadalupe and black bass? I think. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes.
has it gone outside of the bass family to like walleye or anything like that, as far as you know, or carp? Is it, or catfish, or is it kind of sticking in the black bass family?
So it's an interesting question. So first of all, if we kind of like step back to what we now know about the virus biology and the virus, and I'll say viruses. So it's interesting because the virus that is associated with blotchy bass and smallmouth bass is actually different but related to the one associated with the same clinical signs in largemouth bass. So there actually seems to be very high host specificity, right? So we don't have strong science on these specific viruses to support this, but it's these viruses are related to papillomaviruses, which again have very high host specificity, and it's unlikely that the virus from smallmouth is going to jump to a walleye. But and at present we're only aware of these two different viruses in the small and largemouth bass. Other fish, Guadalupe bass, I believe, have been reported with blotchy lesions. So to me that almost suggests that we need to sample other fish, and there could be the potential of other adenomviruses having different fish hosts. So it's interesting because we do receive lots of reports of fish with this hyperpigmented condition now, though. Brown bullheads. We've seen images even from some salmonid species. We haven't sampled those fish to actually answer the virus question, and there are other things that can lead to hyperpigmentation. However, in the case of the blotchy bass, this is a fairly hallmark presentation that it is very straightforward.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Sean, I wanted to give you a chance. Like I said, one thing I wanted to talk about is the rules. Like, as far as when you're catching fish, size, is there a certain size frame that you're looking for, or as far as rules of what fish count and what you're looking for? How does that go?
Yeah, so ideally, in order to get a good prevalence number, which is how often does it occur, we need all fish that you catch being recorded. And so unlike a lot of sort of traditional tournaments per se, we don't care about the longest fish. We have a leaderboard for longest fishes because people like to see who's get the longest, but our prizing isn't structured around that. It's purely a random draw prize. So every fish you catch increases your odds of basically being drawn a prize. So that's an incentive to report all your catches. And if we can get all the catches reported, and doesn't matter the size, small to large, it actually helps us understand the nature of the population for specific water bodies. And so, for example, you were talking about where might this sort of thing grow, how you can apply this in other cases. I mentioned earlier briefly, we're working with the Iowa DNR. Basically, they stock over 150 million walleye across their whole state every year. Huge amounts of resources go to collect the brood stock, basically run the hatcheries, grow the fish, and then release them. Where there's a big gap in their management plan is what happens after the fish are released. So how are the fish doing? How are they growing? What's the relative pressure? So this is where we come in with this model, and the anglers, we can help them fill in that gap. And by reporting every single fish, you get to see a length distribution. We call it a histogram, but basically you see the young age class shoot right up these histograms. So it tells you a lot about the nature of the population in those species. And so that's why we really encourage everyone to report every fish that they catch through the app. I guess one thing I probably step back a little bit on you were talking about sort of thinking forward, what do we want out of it? I know for me, a really important part of this is still a fairly uncertain area of fisheries science. I mean, a lot of folks still kind of look at it with a skeptical eye, thinking, well, you can't really get good data just from anglers. You need to be trained in the formal areas of science. Whereas I would say sometimes that's absolutely true. But there are many cases where the anglers can play a really important role. So formalizing that area within the scientific fishery science profession. So working with the American Fisheries Society in particular, because that is the body of fishery scientists for the most part. I think there's about 8,000 members across Canada, the US, and internationally. And so try to find a way to bring this into the sort of formalize this area of science. And a key part is going to be, how do we bring the anglers in? And so there's a really neat educational opportunity, because like you were saying, you're really a conservationist. You probably have a lot of questions. Well, you do have a lot of questions, as we can tell here, about how things are working. Well, what an amazing way to bring anglers up to speed on where science is at, than having them actually participate in the scientific process, in the method. You're going to get people who are thoroughly engaged and really open to learning. What in other cases, if you think of a classroom example, a lot of people roll their eyes, like science class. Well, this is actually applied science. And what an amazing way to educate people who otherwise, you're working all the time. You don't have time to do this, but just by nature of participating, there's an education that comes with it. So to me, that is a really important part of that, rooting this area of science and formalizing it and having it as an opportunity for anglers to educate themselves about the science of fisheries. I think that to me is, when I'm thinking of the long term, that's the vision. That's what we want to do. And I think the AFS, the American Fisheries Society, is a natural home for that. And so we set up working groups. Luke's in there. I'm not sure, Cynthia, if you're on there, but we work with agencies across North America. Like Dan Doherty of Texas works with alligator gar guides. Really cool ways of collecting new data. We work with sturgeon folks on the Fraser. We work with folks with trout on the Bow River, trying to understand whirling disease. So what we want to do is find a home for all this, because it's happening in all these different places. So that's sort of that long-term vision I've got. I guess you were asking, sorry, I got distracted with your question.
No, you're good. More information, the better.
Asking about the app. So basically, all people do is they go to the website, anglersatlas.com. There's a tab, events, and all our events, at least our publicly facing events. We have private events and things we don't put to the public, but all the public events are there, and Blotchy Bass is one of the events. You just go there, you find the event, and you sign up. You can do it on the website, or you can just download the MyCatch app, and all the events are there. And you sign up, basically, you log in, you set up an account, like anything, you set up an account for Gmail, and then you'll have a username. And that username is basically how we make sure that all these catches that get reported are tied to that individual angler. And then basically, once you're signed up, you sign up for your tournament, and basically you just go out. And what you'll notice is there's a button at the bottom that says Start Trip. So that's a really important feature we added last year. And primarily what this allows us to do is to measure the zeros. Now, I know it might seem strange. It's like, why would I tell people I don't catch anything? Well, that's a really important piece of the data, because if a bunch of anglers are fishing on a water body and they're not catching anything, 1 out of 100 catch them, that tells you a lot about the state of that fishery. It tells you because anglers are hunters. They can find fish, right? If you're not catching fish, or your catch rate is super low, that's going to tell you something about the nature of that fishery. Now, if you get into the scientific discussions and debates, there's some discussion about how useful that information is, but there is real value to it. And so that's why you want to start a trip, because if you don't catch anything, you end your trip and there's a zero. Now, if you do that, we will also add that in as a prize option as well. That's mostly for the Iowa event, but certainly, we want to capture that data as well when you're doing that stuff. And then basically, when you're in a trip, there's an add catch button. You just add the catch, basically take a picture of the fish, fill in a few details, and you're off fishing. And ideally, it takes less than a minute to fill out. So maybe, well, you tell me what you think, Sean. You've gone through it. You've filled out a fish. Is it fairly straightforward? What are the challenges you've got?
Well, I'll be the first one to admit that my biggest challenge is remembering to end my trip. Usually I'm 2 blocks away from the boat ramp and I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to skew that data a little bit because I'll have a nice straight road line driving away from the boat ramp. But no, other than that, when submitting a fish, because it takes you basically you hit add fish, it pops up right to the camera app, gives you a cool little silhouette to kind of put the fish in it, and then you take that picture. It says, hey, do you want to add a hero shot or a release video? I usually do one, if not both. And then it brings you to the type of fish it is. And if you, like for me, since most of mine are smallmouth, I do, it does remember that kind of, so then it's right there for the next one. And I think the process is pretty straightforward. And I like the fact that then those pictures are saved to my camera roll. So later when I go to Facebook and say, hey, this is how I did, they're right there. And I can add those into my Facebook posts and stuff like that, saying, hey, look at these are my catches. So I don't have any problems using the app. I think it's pretty user-friendly and straightforward. So.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, we're always looking for feedback, and the forgetting to end the trip is something you can edit it afterwards and make those adjustments, but we still haven't found a really slick way to do that. We've had some ideas that maybe once the app detects once you're off water, maybe there's a reminder that pops up, but that's a little bit more sophisticated than we can do just now. So I might look at that this fall. So
I know for kayakers, you could probably go off of speed, because as soon as I start going over 10 miles per hour, totally. I'm probably not in my kayak anymore. Either that or I'm going over a waterfall or something bad's happening. But so, okay, cool. Well, I wanted to say, for any folks in the science community looking to kind of use this as a model, who's the best person to reach out to, or how can they get a hold of you guys to say, hey, how did you put all this together? How are you using this?
I guess I can go with that. Yeah, just reach out to me. It takes about 15 minutes to set up. It can be super fast, so long as we know what the question is. And basically, I start with, what's the experimental design? What question are we trying to answer? And then what data do we need? And then we structure the event that satisfies those objectives. If it's pretty straightforward, it takes me 15 minutes, half an hour to actually build the event and post it live. So it's really fast. But then the key challenge, and always the biggest challenge, is how are we going to recruit the anglers? So prizing is key. If you've already got an audience that's engaged, that's gold. But if you don't, then you've got to really come up with a good strategy. When we're launching new events from scratch without any background, prizing is probably the best way to do it. So.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I think we've covered pretty much anything. I wanted to give you all a chance just to shout out any organizations that you work with. Any obviously, I'm going to include links to, I think you said AFCO and Bass Pro. We'll definitely include links to them.
Major League Fishing.
And we'll include links to all of those as sponsors of this event. So shout out to those organizations and companies for supporting this, because I think that's awesome. Especially AFCO sounds like they really stepped up. So very cool to hear about that. Any other links or anything you guys want to throw out there? Obviously, I'll put links to the Anglers Atlas, and how to get this, or where to find the app in the App Store and stuff. But anything else you guys would like included?
We could always provide the link for our project page if you'd like. I don't know if that'll.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If you guys could send me that, I'll make sure I include that in the show notes too. Because that was one thing I kind of thought about. I enjoy being a part of the Blotchy Bass and seeing the length and stuff too. But I was very curious about what it looked like on the back end. What's the science data look like? So if any of that is shared in the project page, I think that would be really cool to for a lot of folks to check out. So yeah, if you give me that, I'll definitely include that in my notes too.
Sure. And I guess one thing I should mention that I haven't yet is that, West Virginia University is a critical partner, in this project as well.
Okay. Very cool. I will include them as well. All right. So I think that kind of wraps things up, guys. If you don't have anything else, then I'll let you get back to your days. Again, I appreciate you all so much for coming on. All the listeners, definitely go out, check out the sponsors. They couldn't do this without them, but also, if you have the time and you're at all interested, sign up for the Blotchy Bass Bonanza and start taking pictures of your fish. It's only going to benefit you and the fisheries that you fish. So definitely give it a chance and give it a try. And I think you'll enjoy it as much as I do. So thank you all for your time so much.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Take care.
Yep. All right, guys. This has been another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast, where we bring you the techniques, the tricks, and the tips to help you rip more lips. You guys have a good night.
Thank you.